All right. So I think in the interest of time, people are still going to be trickling in over the next few minutes, but I think in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and rock and roll here. So again, I just want to thank everybody who is in attendance tonight. We really appreciate you being here. If you're here tonight, you're probably here because you're interested in learning what you need to do in order to be a successful freelancer. And tonight you are in luck. So you'll get to hear from two experienced freelancers who will share their advice on crafting a vibrant freelance practice. Our guest speakers and longtime freelancers, Ed Shems and Justin Perricone, will guide you through the rewards and potential pitfalls of a freelance creative career. They'll cover everything from finding clients to creating contracts to sending a final invoice and other steps that lead to a successful project and, importantly, a happy client. They'll also talk about pivoting during tough times, tips for how to sell your services to new clients, the basics of setting up your business, and how to have that always tricky money conversation without panicking. Also, you can enjoy more freelance success. And I just realized I gave that little mini intro without introducing myself. My name is Scott. I work at the RISD Career Center. I'm a senior career advisor there. And again, thank you all for being here. I also want to just note in a moment, if it hasn't already happened, we'll include some guidelines for interaction in the chat. And one thing in particular that I just want to note for everybody is that for Q&A, which you're welcome to submit throughout, you can use the Q&A feature. The chat is also going to be live, so if you want to use that to comment or get our attention on something, feel free to use that as well. But we do ask that for questions specifically, you use the Q&A feature. And so with that said, I'd like to now formally introduce our speakers for the evening. So Ed Shems is a graduate of the illustration department at RISD and has been freelancing for more than 25 years. He illustrates mostly for middle grade books and early readers, but his current obsession is with writing and illustrating chapter books, graphic novels, and comics. Ed is also an award-winning graphic designer and an unawarded gardener. He's the special guest coordinator for the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo, or MICE, and in 2014, he testified before members of the House of Representatives on behalf of the Graphic Artists Guild, the Copyright Alliance, and all visual artists concerning copyright issues. He is joined tonight by Justin Perricone. Justin Perricone is a UX strategist at Image Conscious Studios, a Boston-based digital design and brand studio. Justin uses research and design to create a user experience that aligns business goals with best practices in modern user-centered design. He was a longtime freelancer and still takes the occasional moonlighting gig. Since 2011, he has presented dozens of talks and webinars on freelancing, typography, and printing at Mass College of Art and Design, AIGA Boston, the Graphic Artists Guild, and right here at RISD. With that, I'll hand things over to Ed and Justin to share their freelancing wisdom with you all. Ed and Justin, welcome, and thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you, Scott. And I really appreciate the Career Center inviting us to speak about freelancing. We're looking forward to taking questions as well. So let's get started.
Go ahead and pat yourselves on the back because you have decided to attend a webinar about how to be a better freelancer. And that means that you're actually a step ahead of most others. We all know there's room for improvement in everything that we do. And for freelancers, one of the best ways to sort of get ahead is to be continually striving for excellence in both the quality of your work and how you run your business.
And some of you may be completely new to this, wondering whether freelancing is right for you, while others are here for a refresher. So welcome.
So first, we're going to talk about some of the advantages of freelancing, of which there are many. The primary one is that you are your own boss. You make your own hours. You get to work from home, or you get to co-work with other folks. You can work from your favorite coffee shop once those are open. You can geek out over stuff and then write them off on your taxes. And importantly, you can do all your work from the confines of your home, which that's where we still are right now.
But we also need to talk about some of the disadvantages. Like your income depends on the constant flow of work, which you have to actively pursue. And aside from doing the work, you're also in charge of marketing, billing, contracts, and chasing payments. You have to purchase and maintain your own equipment. There's nobody to take over when you go on a planned vacation or an unplanned vacation, and you have to be able to sell yourself and what you're able to do for your clients. But for many of us, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, and that's why we're here.
And before we get started, we want to talk a bit about the old elephant in the room here, which is COVID. And while things are slowly starting to get back to normal, the last year or so has been pretty tumultuous for many people. And it may have a lot of folks rethinking about striking out on your own. We know that many of you may have a lot of questions about the job market. Have there been changes in prices or reductions in jobs? And it's kind of tricky. It has definitely wrecked a number of different markets, as I'm sure we've all seen, but it's oddly enough boosted some as well. And some freelancers and sectors have fared better than others, depending on who their client set is, but it hasn't been boom or bust across the board. From what we've seen and kind of heard firsthand, there is definitely still freelance demand. And more so now that we're starting to kind of come out of lockdowns and such. And while the work might not be from certain clients, there are a lot of buyers and other freelancers who are looking to increase their capacity, which is creating demand. So yes, it is still worth being a freelancer, but you still got to hustle to get to work.
The first step to becoming a freelancer is realizing that you're an entrepreneur. You're doing things for yourself and making your own way, and everything you do is up to you. It's liberating and terrifying. But the first step is realizing you're a business. So let's get started. You need to be serious. You need to get legit.
First, you're going to want to name your business. That's kind of important. And you want to decide on a name and to design something around that. Branding yourself is pretty important. And it's not just about the name, it's about the visual that you can come up with. Your brand and your presence online should convey professionalism, competence, and creativity. And you're going to use this brand for yourself seamlessly across social media, your website, estimates, invoices. And so a quick word about naming, because this kind of seems to come up. And yes, it can be as simple as your name plus what you do, Joe Schmo Illustration, Jane Doe Web Services. But there are some things to be cautious about. You're definitely going to want to check to make sure that name is available for a website, for social media, as it is, without having to append it with dashes and dots and things like that make it hard to type that URL or type that handle. And will anyone have trouble spelling the name you choose? I have the name Perricone, which basically is wrong constantly. So, but I still named my company after that.
We say this, we do.
Yes. The next thing you're going to want to get is an EIN. And this is called an employer identification number. It's linked to your social security. And it is often used or required by a number of clients. You can get an EIN by going to irs.gov, Googling get an EIN, and I believe we're actually going to drop this link in. Yep, there it is, and that's how you get it. It makes it really easy to fill out W-9s, which is going to be something that you may come across, which, depending, some clients want you to have that to collect information that they use because they're paying you as a freelancer and a bunch of crazy tax fun stuff. We'll get to that too. It's also useful in documents like the ST4 in Massachusetts, which allows you as a business to register with a printer as a reseller so you don't get charged tax on jobs that you're printing for a client. The AIN also creates a nice little barrier between your social security number and or I should say it be between you and your social security number. So it's not floating out there where somebody can buy an RV in your name. But one thing to remember though is that it's nearly impossible to retrieve an EIN after you've gotten it. So if you forget it, you're kind of stuck. So keep it on record, email it to yourself, put it under a profile on your phone so you kind of always have it nearby. But one of the other cool benefits is that you can use it to open up a business bank account, to get a business credit card, and definitely look around for a bank with free business checking. It's a pretty common thing, and there's many that will charge you fees, but definitely look around and you should be able to find something local that allows you to do banking for free. But why do you want to get your own business bank account and a credit card? Well, simple. It allows you to keep track of your business expenses separate from your personal expenses. And it makes tracking your finances really, really simple and clear. And here's the thing. Every time you have an expense, you should do what Ed does.
You can keep your receipts in an old cigar box. You make a note of what it was for and then record it in whatever accounting software you want to use. I recommend Wave Apps. That's a screenshot of it over on the right. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Depending on the type of creative work you do, you can write off certain things. You know, right off the bat, most of you can write off art supplies or the technology you use to get your work done. The more expensive stuff gets depreciated over a period of a few years. But there's also reference material. And once we can all get back to physical meetings, the coffee that you buy at Starbucks to drink while you and a client discuss a project. But you know, why should you track your expenses?
Well, let's take a look here. So let's look at this sheet. And according to it, you made $21,000 last year as freelance income. And it's also showing that you had business expenses totaling $7,450. So your expenses include, you know, $310 for advertising. Maybe that was printing postcards and mailing them, for Instagram ads. Depreciated goods, you maybe bought an iPad and Sketch and Procreate, or supplies like drawing boards, a scanner, subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud. You've expensed your home office, part of your phone and utilities. There's a number of expenses. And this is money that you're going to be spending anyway on your business. And the fact is, and you're going to want to expense it so that you actually owe less in taxes. Anything that you expend comes off of what you would be income. So that decreases your tax burden. So in this instance, by simply keeping track of your taxes, or your expenses, you've dropped your tax bill by $1,200. And so you may be wondering, do you have to pay for these items using your business card? No, you don't. But there's, just like we talked about, a way to keep things separate, and it makes it easier to notice when you're spending too much money on coffee. Keep your receipts or scan them in and keep them organized, just in case the IRS suddenly has too much time on their hands. And it's not too late to start tracking expenses for the year. If you're using a business credit card, you'll have statements of past things. And if you're just using it for business stuff, again, it makes it really easy to start tracking from there. But it is super important, before you take any of this too seriously, to speak to a CPA. We, Ed and I, we're not CPAs. We are not licensed to give you advice, and we're actually not even smart enough to promise that we're getting it right just for you. So how do you find a CPA? Ask around, do some Googling. Definitely talk to artist friends, people who kind of do the same thing you do. You'll want to find one who's probably accustomed to doing artisty type work. That being said, the type of CPA that we need, our work isn't all that complicated, but it's nice having somebody who understands that artists and creative types can be a little flaky when it comes to record keeping.
Next up, you'll want collateral. So you need something to help people find and remember you. So for example, obviously you need a website, but even if it's just behance.net to start, you need some place to showcase your work and direct people to. But these days, it's super easy to put together a portfolio website using Wix or Squarespace. In fact, I just put together one on Squarespace, and if I could do it, then hey. Or there's also WordPress, which might be a little more advanced. Something that has your own unique URL, and then be sure to link to your social media accounts and include a way for someone to contact you. Social media, choose which platforms work for you, and then keep them updated and looking professional. We'll be talking more about this later. Business cards, for when we can get back to meeting people face to face. A business card is an important leave behind, and it can tell someone a lot about you and your business. Depending on how you design it and the quality of the printing, you can come across as creative, funny, successful. In other words, someone to consider hiring. So make sure to include contact info, website, and social media. And many people consider it good practice to leave some open space so a new contact can make a note after meeting you. So, okay, you've got your best work up on your website, got those business cards, a bank account, and a cigar box, but don't forget about one of the most powerful ways to show off your work, social media. One of the things we can't stress enough is how important a social media presence can be. So social media might seem just like a distraction for some, and for many of us it is, but it's also an amazing way to connect to other creatives and get in front of potential clients. So let's make sure that your accounts are in shape. Instagram, Behance, Dribbble, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Tumblr, Pinterest, DeviantArt, and others like Twitch, and the list goes on and on. There are plenty out there. Find where you are comfortable and post regularly. Interact with others, share interesting info that isn't always just about your latest sketch, and you'll build a community and a following. just skip the personal photos so that your page stays consistently work related. And an exception a lot of artists make is for their Instagram stories, or sometimes Facebook stories too. That's where you can show off your dog or how many pull-ups you can do. You might be thinking that Facebook is no longer much of a place to share your work, but I really believe that's not the case. Share stuff from your business page to your personal page from time to time, and you'll remind friends and family that you're in the creative industry. And when someone asks them if they know a creative who can do what you do, you'll immediately come to mind. But if you're just going to leave things dormant or unfinished on a social media platform, don't send people there. Better yet, take it down if you're not going all in. Before you post, make sure you watermark your work, both digitally and visually, in the format you see here. Copyright, 2021, or whatever year you first pushed the work out into the public domain, followed by your name or business name. This serves to help, but not prevent, to keep people from infringing on your copyright, but it especially tells people who you are and how to find you so they can hire you. So here's a cartoon with my visual watermark on the bottom, next to the metadata I've added to the file. And you can set the metadata in Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop. You just, while you're in there, you hit Command-Shift-Option-I. And this whole thing comes up, and you can actually create a template that you can then just access on the bottom there. And it doesn't have to be the most difficult thing in the world once you wrap your head around it.
And so with all of that, you may be wondering now, how do I find work? And for some, this is the kind of ever elusive unicorn, which, and it's kind of likely why the question that we're asked the most. A big part of what finds work is networking. And I'm sure you've heard it a million times. And even though Scott's camera is off, I'm sure he's nodding his head in the background, but it really is one of the most important things when pursuing the unicorn. It's art and design events. And you think, okay, great, I'm in a room with a bunch of creatives that pretty much do what I do. What good is that going to be for me? Well, you might not be able to sell to them, or can you? Maybe you'll meet somebody who's good at one thing and then another person who's good at another thing, and you start to find these creative complements to you, people who do the things that you don't do. And so why is this important? Well, you can find other clients by meeting other creatives who need to offer the sorts of things that you excel at to their clients. And in return, you find creatives who do the things that you don't do. And now you can say yes when a client of yours asks you to help them with a part of their business that maybe isn't your forte. And rather than just going out to find other clients, in addition, you'll be finding creatives who you can start a reciprocal relationship with. As our work becomes increasingly dispersed and complex, it's good to know people who know the stuff that you don't.
So RISD has a number, excuse me, of opportunities to network. There's a RISD Career Center networking page with tons of info and opportunities. We're going to drop, oh, Justin's dropping some links in there. It includes advice on how to approach networking, as well as RISD-related resources you can take advantage of. RISD alumni regional clubs and affinity groups. I know it's really long, a really long name, but these groups provide an opportunity for alumni to connect with each other through their professions or geographic regions where they're living or working or shared interests. And then there's RISD Network. This is a new initiative from RISD Alumni Relations that was launched last spring. The platform helps foster connections between RISD students and hundreds of alumni around the world by facilitating career-related conversations and mentorship. And you already have this connection that's catered to your needs, and we encourage you to take advantage of it. In fact, I attended an online event by RISD alumni in animation with Alison Dubois a couple of weeks ago and learned so much.
So a big part of freelancing is being able to sell yourself. And one of the most important attributes is being able to project a bit of confidence. That means no more posting things on Facebook, like anything that kind of demeans your work or anything that knocks your ability to solve problems for clients. What you create, only you are able to do it that way. And this is real. Only you can make the decisions that you make. And once you have the confidence that what you create has value to your clients, then you're going to get somewhere. And Ed has a really great example of this.
So I have a distant cousin. I love this story. I have a distant cousin who used to come to my parents' house for holidays while he studied at Harvard. My mom's an amazing cook, so he was there religiously for a few years. And every time we saw him, he would confidently announce his plan to compose music for Hollywood after graduation. Don't get me wrong, he was a great guy, but we all just would nod our heads and smile. And we weren't his potential client, but you can be sure that he was just as confident when he spoke to Hollywood folks. And fast forward to 2017, when he received 2 Academy Awards for Best Original Score and Best Original Song for City of Stars for La La Land. Justin's drive, coupled with his talent, drove him to where he wanted to go. So how about you? Figure out what you're... Sorry?
That Justin, not this Justin.
Yeah. Figure out what your goals are and then go after them. There's no room for uncertainty and self-deprecation. Tuck your art under your arm and run for the goal line. Figure out what your potential client is looking for and craft a message that speaks to their objectives. And remember your entrepreneurial spirit. That's such a tough word.
It's too many vowels.
Oh, which is why you need to have an elevator pitch so you can do it for yourself. That means always having a relevant project to talk about at the ready. Even if it's about something that's not relatively recent, you should be able to confidently talk about an interesting project in 30 seconds or less. Better yet, keep a few in your back pocket and choose the one that fits best with the audience that you have in your elevator.
So now you're ready for your jump start. And this is how anyone in pretty much any field can get started with something, a client, a project, or just a step in the right direction. And the idea of starting off as a freelancer is incredibly daunting to so many people, but we're hoping that we can provide you with sort of the jump start that you need to get things going for yourself. And one of the first avenues that many people think about is crowdsourcing and competitions. You know, they've got a low barrier entry. You can show off your work, get a bit of practice, maybe get paid. But this is a big fat no-no. Sites like 99 Designs and Fiverr are just, they're bad news. They kind of degrade the industry. It makes us all look like we'll work for next to nothing. You know, how are you expected to compete against these cheap sites? Well, by creating custom quality work that you can guarantee is original, and by working with your clients as a partner rather than just sort of a one-off from a brief. And again, it's important to figure out how to sell yourself so that your potential client recognizes the value that you can bring to their growing business. Anyone who can't see that value is more than welcome to pay $5 for an amazing Fiverr logo. And so with that in mind, here are some ways you can get a real legit jumpstart. First and foremost, and most obviously, and maybe you can even, maybe most obviously you can find a paying client. Many creatives want to get their jump in with client work right off the bat. And while it can seem impossible to find clients, if you look in the right places, you start to discover a world of possibilities.
So there's a lot here, and I'm just going to move really quickly through it. But Justin's going to post this to the chat. It's, you know, it's a lot of info, but here we go. Creative conferences. So there's ICON, the Illustration Conference, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SEBWI, How Design, AIGA Design Conference, Adobe Max, 99U, TypeCon, there's Mocha Fest also, many more. Meet people in your industry and find out what type of clients they work with. You'll get new ideas. There are many high-profile speakers who are also art buyers. Connect. Find creative compliments through there too. Meetups for creatives, think the hashtag KidLitArt. Museum gallery openings, you never know who's going to show up to those types of things. No one right now, but soon. Local businesses and restaurants. I'm willing to bet there's a restaurant near you that you know really well, whose menu, online or print, drives you crazy. Offer to redesign it for them. Databases for rent, agency access, Info USA. Purchase contact info for art buyers for the media of your choice, and then send them stuff. Twitter pitch parties like PitMad, hashtag PitMad, where writers tweet a 280 character pitch for their manuscripts. Also hashtag PB pitch, hashtag DV pit, hashtag kid pit. Publisher Weekly job moves. I read through Publisher Weekly daily, which I know is funny. Book illustrators and writers, get on the mailing list for the Publisher Weekly's daily emails. And toward the bottom each day, they post who's moved to a new position or a new company. Send that person a congratulations postcard. I do that from time to time. I've never seen anything come of it, but you never know. Post regularly on social media. That's a no-brainer. Make sure you tag your work so it can be found. Pinterest too. Pinterest is really booming. Ask a mutual friend to introduce you, either in real life or like on LinkedIn. Parties, everyone you meet is a possible connection. Am I going too fast? Is this right? That doesn't mean you should be a pushy salesperson 24/7. Instead, as part of the conversation, let people know what you do and give them something to visualize so that they have a clear idea. Such as, instead of saying that you're a designer, tell them you design websites for restaurants. Instead of saying you're a digital artist, tell them you sculpt 3D characters digitally. Don't minimize what you do. These people are potential clients. Search and follow on social media. That's how you create relationships with other like-minded creatives. Post your work everywhere, but be sure to include a legible copyright notification like I showed you earlier.
Deep breath. The next opportunity that we're really big fans of is pro bono work. And one thing that doesn't get talked about enough are the pluses of doing pro bono work. And just so we're clear here, pro bono work is work that you are doing sort of for a nonprofit normally when we're talking about here. Find one that you believe in. It could be a charity, a house of worship, an animal shelter, and offer them your services. Worst case scenario, you've helped a worthy cause and you have a great new piece for your portfolio and social media accounts. And on the plus side, when board members and other folks associated with that see the quality of your work, they may hire you to do work for the for-profit company that they might also work for. And even nonprofits have budgets for creative work and may end up hiring you for other projects. And although the work might be pro bono, you should still treat the organization as professionally as you would a paying client. Start with a contract, and at the end of the project, send them a bill with everything zeroed out. This is a great way that they can see the value that they're receiving, and they'll also recognize the amount of work that's going into a project. One little note, though, is that the services you are offering a pro bono client are not tax deductible. There's not it's not a donation, unfortunately. Here are just a few examples of places that might be looking for pro bono work. And I can definitely say from my own personal experience that some of my best and earliest paying clients were those that I started doing pro bono work for. I had one that I had on retainer for literally years. They just cut me a check every few months to just keep doing work. It was fantastic. And a total nonprofit. And so, yeah, this is just a number of different ways. Look around, there's plenty of things out there. However, this might not be the right path for you. So what about a personal project? Everyone that's creative has some kind of weird idea buzzing around in their head, and that they're just going to want to explore. So why not find the time to do that? Personal projects exist no matter what type of work or art that you make. They're great as a creative outlet after working all day, or to kind of get your business moving again. Or maybe you want to pivot or explore some new types of work, like an illustrator starting to focus on animation. Redesign a brand your way, write a zine, create a comic, do a brand redesign, create gig posters, and just think about kind of weird passion projects. Document your work and post it to social media and then see if it has legs. But even though you expect others to recognize the genius of what you put out, don't be surprised if it doesn't make any waves. And if it doesn't, try another and then another. As a weird kind of personal story of this, one day I was taking my dog for a walk and I had this just weird idea for something I wanted to try in Illustrator. I got home and within a few minutes, I whipped it up, added some color, and I made it into a gig poster for a band that I was listening to at the time, just for the hell of it. Later that night, I posted it to Flickr. I tagged the band, and a few months later, I got an email from the band's manager asking if they could license the art to sell on tour shirts. And just like that, my design was being sold by Riot. And I've, over the last decades, I've spent thousands of dollars to see bands. I bought records, I bought merch, but to this day, this is actually the only band I've ever made money from. So
here are two examples of passion projects. Rafael Serra made a series of retro logos of modern brands that Dribbble showed off for him in one of their newsletters. And then there's Chris Piasek, who challenged himself over a decade ago, actually 14 years ago, to do a drawing every day. And he's continued. Now he's got books, pins, posters, and a cache of big time clients because of where the project took him. This isn't to say that this is a surefire way to any payday, but at the very least, you're putting your effort into doing what you love, and actively working at something you're passionate about is nothing but positive when it comes to a career. But what if you don't have a new amazing idea and just want to become better at what you do? At the very least, an opportunity can come from learning something new. We talked about finding creative complements. Well, what about becoming your own? Take a Skillshare class in animation or marketing. Take a Udemy class in coding or Photoshop. There are countless free and cheap resources out there for those who want to learn new skills, skills that you can use as part of your passion project, or just to feel more confident and well-versed in what you can offer to clients. It's a great first step in being your own creative complement. I know this whole finding clients and passion projects thing can be a lot to take in, but hopefully it's sparking some new ideas to give you a jump start or a reboot for your freelance career.
And just like that, the big stuff. Let's talk money.
Trying to avoid this, Justin.
I know, I'm sorry. We're going to have to talk about it. And the most common question, how much do I charge? And the most common response, hourly or flat rate? Well, it depends. Most creatives have an hourly rate for their work. If you're a web designer, you also design logos, those rates might be different. You take your hourly rate, you multiply it by the number of hours you expect a job to take, and then you give the client that number. Exceptions to this are made for certain projects that might have too many moving parts or simply based on hours, like social media work, website updates, meetings, consulting, retainer work, etc. But where are you getting your hourly rate from? Did you make it up? Did you use one of those online calculators that have so many variables you can't possibly get a good answer? A good first step here is to start by asking a colleague, but definitely take their answer with a grain of salt. If you are a logo designer and you ask Milton Glaser what his hourly rate will be, it's going to be tremendously higher than if you ask somebody that's a little bit more in line with your experience. But Mr. Glaser deserves to get paid well. He has decades of experience, including ridiculously successful projects, logos, graphic work, poster designs. But even still, we tend to underprice ourselves. And so let's say you've asked around, you've talked to a couple of friends, and you settled in at $50 an hour. And you've found some success. You've gotten clients, you're paying the bills, you're putting some money away for later. And let's say that you're able to fill your days with work. That's $400 a day. Many of us would love to be in the same boat. You're working 8 hours, you're making $400, but let's make a change. Instead of charging $50 an hour, let's say you charge $100 an hour. Now, some leads might balk at the price, and maybe some former clients don't send as much work your way. In fact, now you're only billing half the hours that you were before. So now you're in the same position, right? Well, no. Actually, while you're making the same amount of money, you've also gained 4 hours of your day. And that's time that you can put into more client work, side projects, looking for new clients, creating content, cleaning up after your kids, or just otherwise not undervaluing your time. Now, not many people are able to charge $100 an hour, but think about not undervaluing the work you have to offer. After all, your goal should be to find clients who recognize your value and are willing to pay you properly for it. The value that you bring to the table is probably the most important thing when it comes to pricing a project. The same way that your time has value to you, it also has value to a client. And always remember that the work you do is benefiting them. It's incredibly important to consider exactly how it's benefiting your clients when you're thinking about a price. This idea of pricing for value is kind of a foundation for a completely different way about thinking about pricing. So instead of figuring out what a project is worth to you, as in what would it take for you to do it, think about what value the work is bringing to your client. And this concept might seem a little bit shifty at first, and I 100% agree, but there's one thing that's incredibly important to remember as we go forward, and it's simply that price is arbitrary. The rules for pricing are not hard and fast. There isn't some perfect price that exists. After all, a fair price is just what a customer is willing to pay. You can consult pricing guides like the Graphic Artists Guild's Pricing and Ethical Guidelines Handbook. And that'll help you give you a wide range, but that's the point. Depending on circumstances, as well as those of your client, you can be anywhere in this incredible range, just as an example here. So here's another example of how arbitrary price can be. If you're at a 7-Eleven in Boston and you buy a bottle of water, it's going to cost you about $1.50. But if you hop on the T and you take it 15 minutes to the airport, that same bottle is going to cost you $3.50. Is the water any better? Why not charge $20? Well, people at the airport are smart enough to know they won't sell enough water at that price for them to be worth it. Buyers and sellers don't see the value in a $20 bottle of water. Value means that both parties are gaining something from the transaction. The price of the water is not too unreasonable to the buyer, and the seller maximizes their profit. We know what happens if the price is too high. No water gets sold. But if the price is too low, they either can't keep it in stock, or there becomes a weird issue of trust. Like maybe they're just selling bottles they filled from the bathroom sink. Like for instance, if somebody tries to sell you an iPhone 12 for $100, you'd rightly assume it's stolen or broken. But as creatives, we offer a service, not a product. And we're not competing in terms of a commodity where price is all that matters. Each of us provides something unique for our clients. And while they're paying us for an end product, they're also paying us for our expertise. So it's the situation that dictates what somebody is willing to pay. So let's talk about the value that you bring to different clients with the following example. We're going to compare two very similar projects pitched to two very different clients or companies. The first is a local pizza shop named Blanco's that's interested in having you do some kind of an illustration for their box for their 50th anniversary. They've got good pizza and a reasonable deadline, so you think it over and you figure this will take you, 10 to 15 hours. So let's just use the $100 an hour we had from before to come up with a price of $1,500. Let's just call this the baseline rate. Now, a week later, you get a call from the head of marketing at Domino's, and they're also interested in having you illustrate a pizza box. How odd is that? And their ask isn't all that different. One illustration, similar deadline, and you estimate the same, 10, 15 hours, and you also come up with a price of $1,500. I mean, it's the same type of work with the same type of deadline that'll take you the same amount of time, so the price should be the same, right? Well, no. Both companies are not deriving the same value from that project. Blanco's is a small mom and pop pizza place, while Domino's has 5,000 stores. And in 2020, they made $1.6 billion in profit. So suddenly $1,500 seems pretty ridiculous, right? Knowing that your work will be printed on millions of boxes, it'll be seen by millions of people when they get their delivery, and also in advertisements, the value that Domino's is able to derive from your work is vastly higher. And thusly, you need to bump up the price than if it were Blanco's. A good way to think about this is to just think about the more eyes, the more impact, the more impact, the more value. The more value, the more cost. So in the end, Blanco's might fall a little bit below your baseline because they're a small company and may not be able to afford that $1,500. But for you to quantify that drop in price, you're going to want to assume probably a drop in deliverables, like maybe fewer sketches or rounds or revisions. And by the way, that below the baseline price for Blanco's should never fall so low that you're taking a loss. And meanwhile, Domino's soars above. Think of it as baseline plus or minus extenuating circumstances. Other extenuating circumstances might be limited use, so the price may go down, or extending the license for shirts and stickers, in which the price goes up. And that price can fluctuate depending on a million other details, like whether it's a rush job, whether it's limited use, if they want to use the art for other things like posters. We'll talk more about this later when we're talking about using tiers for estimating a project. But get comfortable, everyone, because it's about to get awkward.
Oh, that's silly. Artists are never awkward, Justin. But if you want to avoid an uncomfortable money conversation, get some ideas about budget early on. All right, how do you do this? Well, obviously, it helps to find out as many details as you can before you quote the job. How fast do you need it? What sort of rights do you need? Is it work for hire? If so, why? Who will be making the decisions? The person you're talking to? A committee? That's a red flag. Do you have a set budget? We're going to help out with some conversation starters. So feel free to take a screenshot of the next screen and, tuck it into your back pocket. And any of these should help get the ball rolling. So I'll read the first one. I think the last thing we need to get to is budget. Do you have a number in mind before I work up my estimate?
Let's talk about budget now. Do you have one that you're working with?
I'm going to work up some numbers next and then get back to you. Do you have a certain budget?
And as for budget, were you looking to spend 500, 2,500, 5,000? Your answer will tell me how much work you're looking to get from me.
By putting out those numbers, it also helps to anchor the lowest price that they can expect from you. It's very helpful. That if the client is able to tell you their budget, obviously that will be very helpful, as it shows you how much they're actually looking to do. A low budget means that some of the things they're asking for either can't be done under that budget, or they'll have to be modified, which is why it's usually a good idea to create tiers in your estimate. Here's what you get for the low budget, and at a higher budget, we can also get XYZ done and do it faster. So if the client has told you their budget, lay out what you can do for that number. We'll call that as requested. Along with that, show them what a higher budget might offer them, but only if you think it would add value to the project. You're not trying to sell a 12-course meal to someone who came in for a salad. It's more like you're suggesting adding some grilled chicken or a piece of salmon. In this very simplified example, the client has asked for a 10-second animation starring 3 original characters in one scene with a budget of $7,300. Because you think it would tell the story better, you also quote them the cost for a 15-second animation involving a change of scene, and be ready to support your reasons. On the other hand, if they didn't have a set budget and you're unsure where you think you should be with your price, multiple tiers are again a great way to go. The as requested level is where you feel your price should be, considering all the aspects of the request for proposal, or RFP, or brief. In case your as requested level is too high for the client, or to give them something to compare to, the economy tier gives them less for less money. It's important to remember that negotiation is a give and take. If they want a lower price, something has to give elsewhere. That could mean a longer deadline or a reduction of deliverables, or maybe your name in the credits is really big. There's so much more that we could say about pricing, which is why we do a deeper dive in our How to Price Your Work webinar. But so that this doesn't turn into a 3-hour presentation, it's time to move on. But we're happy to take questions at the end, more questions about this at the end.
So the next thing you're going to want to definitely do is to keep yourself organized. You're going to want to create a template estimate with the brand you've created and some contact info at the top. Add some text underneath about how much you appreciate the company for reaching out to you, and use it as a way to quickly put together quotes. Hang on to it for the next one. Same for contracts, invoices, anything else you want to automate. Copy, paste is your friend. The more organized you are, the more quickly and easily you can respond to inquiries. And if you're unsure, try bouncing it off a friend to make sure it reads the way that you want it to. And when it's time to start a project, you're going to want to get a contract, and you're going to want to use that contract every time. You're going to want to use it even with family, actually, especially with family. A contract is one of those ways of saying, look, I'm a professional, you're a professional, let's do things the right way. It contains the expectations for you and what is expected of your client in the project.
On the rare occasion a client balks at having to work with the contract, frame it in a way that shows her why it's important for her. A contract details what she should expect from the creative, time and work-wise, and also about what rights she will own once the project is completed and paid for. How can she say no to that? For the creative's benefit, that's you. The contract can clearly communicate that feedback must come within, say, 2 days, or the deadline will get moved back, or that until final payment is received, you retain the rights to the work, and so on. You can find sample contracts online through the AIGA or the same Graphic Arts Guild's PEGS handbook we mentioned earlier. Wherever you find them, you'll want to make your own modifications depending on the type of work you are doing.
And so speaking of getting a job, it's time to get paid. And for that, you're going to need to send and then track an invoice. We had mentioned this earlier. We're going to talk about it again. Take a look at waveapps.com. It's invoicing and bookkeeping software. It's totally free. They have an app you can use on your phone. You can use it on your desktop. You can keep track of expenses, take credit card payments, follow up on invoices, scan receipts. We've both been using it for years and love it. And it's also important to remember that good service matters, and is what keeps clients coming back almost as much as doing great work. Throughout the project, just be a good communicator, respond quickly to their messages, update the client periodically.
And this used to be a problem spot for me until I challenged myself to make sure that my clients never have to check in. And if I ever receive a message wondering about the status of a project, then I consider it a motivator for me to do better.
You're going to want to follow up after each project, make sure they're happy with the outcome. For instance, if it's a print job, keep track of it and then follow up after it's arrived. It's also a good time to ask whether now is an okay time to share the project online. Of course, that right is already expressed in the contract you wrote, but it's always a nice courtesy to check to make sure that it's the proper time to share. Keep in touch with your clients and, so that you can stay top of mind. Put them on a holiday card list, send them postcards, send an occasional email newsletter, and just remind them how great it was to work with you. And, it's important to try to stay busy while you're while you're waiting to get busy with other clients, you should keep creating. For instance, you can sell prints, you can sell stickers, one-of-kind creations, or digital goods on any number of online marketplaces: Creative Market, Etsy, Gumroad, Spoonflower, Society6, Redbubble, or you can sign up for RISD Made or get a table at craft fairs like RISD Craft.
Print on demand is a good place to test things out. If they were, sorry, if what you're selling works using print on demand, move them into somewhere more profitable. So for example, if you're designing t-shirts and you don't know whether they'll sell, instead of paying a lot of money to print in many sizes and styles and then storing them in your garage, a site like Redbubble will do print on demand for you. Of course, you'll make only a small portion for that benefit. Sell the shirts for $25 and you'll make something like $3. Once you know the shirts are successful, do a print run, not too many, but do a print run and fulfill the orders yourself. You'll sell them on Etsy for $25 plus shipping, and you'll make like $21 a shirt. Just be forewarned, sometimes there just isn't as much demand as you were expecting.
And finally, it's important to say a few things about the work you're creating. Work smart, always keep learning and strive for improvement. We can all always do better. And that said, remember to have confidence in the value that you and your work have to offer. If you're not confident about working with clients, it's a good idea to figure out why. Are you uncomfortable negotiating and talking to people? Perhaps you should get an agent and leave the negotiating to them. Are you worried that your work isn't good enough? If so, take some time to work out how you can improve, fill in the gaps of your knowledge with online learning. Start now and enlist a few creatives to start a critique group.
And most importantly, remember to run your business like it's a business. Sometimes we forget that's what it is because many of us are lucky enough to be running a business doing something we love.
And with that, definitely a big thank you today to RISD's Career Center for having us, asking us to share Ready Set Freelance. Thank you to everybody who came. Please feel free to connect with Ed on social media, and let us know if you have any questions. Please hit us up in the Q&A.
So I'll start by saying Justin didn't believe that picture of the banana stand was real. That is not photoshopped. That is a real photo I took in Athens a bunch of years ago.
Fun fact. I also have to say, so first of all, just want to jump in, say thank you both. That was an incredibly comprehensive talk covering everything from, getting started as a business to finding clients, to talking about, your pricing scheme, to contracts. I mean, social media marketing, the whole gamut. So that was an incredible whirlwind, but super, super digestible and helpful. And I know our audience got a lot out of that talk. So I just want to say first and foremost, thank you. I also want to say I did not start the night thinking that I would see a visual reference to Tiger King in this presentation. And the fact that that happened was pretty great. So that made my night. It was a neat little surprise. I don't know if anybody else caught that early on. But yeah, I mean, I echo, if people have questions, feel free to shoot them in the Q&A right now, and we can definitely ask them of Ed and Justin. I have one or two of my own, if you'll indulge me real quick to get us started. So one that I have is asking you kind of both maybe to go back in time a little bit to when you were both starting out as freelancers, as I imagine some people in the audience are current students or very recent alum and are maybe dabbling in freelancing, have done some, but maybe it's not their full-time career yet, but they're looking to make that leap. Is there one thing or one highlight that you could think about where if you could go back in time and do it differently, or you struggled a little with in the beginning, what would be one key piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's sort of emerging as a freelancer?
I'll jump in.
There
There were a few, and we planted them, we seeded them throughout our talk. And obviously, one of our big ones is remember that this is a business, and you treat it that way, and don't expect luck to be on your side. Like, oh, jobs are going to just fall in my lap. You actively have to get out there and search for jobs and push for jobs and explain to people why you're the best person for the job. So, again, we talked about confidence and how important it is to have, which I know is really hard for some of us. It's hard to it sounds egotistical to say I'm a great illustrator, but that's what you kind of have to do. You have to sell people, because there's someone else over there who
is willing to say
as
that.
good as you, and they're going to sell themselves and get the job. I guarantee it. I've seen it happen, and those people are going to get more experience, and they're going to surpass you in quality and in know-how, because they're getting more experience than you.
I think part of the reason why we talk about money as much as we do is because I feel like that's one thing that early on we all had this tendency to just be like, 20 bucks an hour, 25 bucks an hour. I know my very first, like big breaking out freelance gig, I wish I had charged double, and I probably could have charged double. I've had projects where I, didn't really want to do it. And so I just came up with a price and then doubled it, and the client still said yes. And it just shows like how easy it is to leave money on the table. Sort of to kind of push back on your question, which was things I would change. One thing I would definitely keep the same was talking to a CPA early on, because the first project I had was the first time I ever had non-taxed money. And it was a fairly big chunk of it. And if I had spent it like it was already taxed, I would have had a very, very bad tax season that year. So little things like that, knowing about your tax burden is super helpful.
Talk to an accountant. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll talk about another regret. So in this webinar, we talk about understanding the value and knowing what the value is to your potential client. And a few years ago, I had an opportunity to create a business name and design the branding for them across the board. And the job was mine. I turned to Justin, and we kind of applied this thinking to it. And with Justin's coaching, I put out this, I gave them my estimate, and I called the person. Sometimes it's really helpful, often it's really helpful to call the person right as they're getting it, so you can talk them through. Unfortunately, he was in the car, so he couldn't look at the PDF I sent. So he said, I'll call you as soon as I stop. Well, he never called back, because my price was so high that he just dismissed me outright. And so it was a really interesting experience to recognize that there are limits, and it doesn't always work, and you got to figure out what works for you. And yeah, there are limits.
I had a client, same sort of thing. I sent them a proposal, got them on the phone, and the client, the prospective client, was in tears over the price, like in tears. And not because she was so happy about how cheap it was.
Oh.
But I think, I mean, obviously there's so much great value in this presentation, but one of the slides I liked in particular was the kind of cascade of the different comments that you could make when you're trying to introduce the budget and pricing conversation. You're trying to get that conversation started. And I thought so many of those suggestions were terrific, and especially the tiered option, which was like, what's your budget? Is it 500? Is it 2,500? Is it 5,000?
Right.
I really like that one in particular, because it does it sets up this idea of a tiered pricing structure for one. And I think you both mentioned that it also sets up this, like, here's the baseline, right? Like, here's the lowest you're probably going to get. And so it prompts that kind of conversation early, I would imagine, where if there's like such a disparity on price, you can kind of get that out of the way quickly and address it if it needs to be addressed. So
I
yeah,
absolutely know that was what happened with the woman who was crying, is because we didn't talk budget. I got a sense from what she had to spend, but we didn't specifically talk about it. And I wish I had this slide. I always tell Ed this is like my favorite slide in the deck because it's so actionable. It's something you can just take with it, and it's so easy. Like I want to know. I definitely want everybody to understand that, like, you know, sometimes I don't know, Ed and I might come across as like savvy business folk, but like we're kind of awkward schmucks too. Like we kind of muddled our way through this, and like I wish I had had something like that.
Well, this was born from,
it's business. Like it's, you know,
this is born from remembering so many. I remember so many times being on a call with a client and knowing that this is the moment right here. This is where I bring up money and not doing it because we don't want to feel uncomfortable. We don't want to feel awkward. And so that's where these 4 examples was born, because I know that if I just had this piece of paper right here, you know, while I'm talking to the person, I could look over and just feel like, so let's talk about budget now, and help the words come out.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's really important that you find your way to ask for their budget.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, you know, I just want to also emphasize that these are important conversations to have. And it's also, you know, important to value the work that you're doing, right? At the end of the day, which is, I'm just echoing something that you both really drove home throughout. But, you know, it's not, you know, it's not the kind of like, oh, we're like shady business guys perspective. It's like, hey, we're valuing the service that we're providing to people, and we're incredibly talented, and we should be compensated for providing that service. I mean, that's the way I look at it. It's sort of, it's that basic to a certain extent.
Our landscaper charges us for cutting the grass. He
Exactly.
outside in the sun. I mean, shouldn't he pay me?
Right.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Justin, go for it.
Yeah, no, we got a question that came up about how much cost of living, you know, should you consider cost of living when it comes to pricing? Absolutely. It's hard to say what that is, but let's just say that if you were to try charging the same amount in, you know, cheaper cities or cheaper parts of the country that you might in Boston or New York or the East Coast, it may not come across the same. So it's an easy thing to say, yes, cost of living matters, but it's hard to say how much and in what way. A lot of it has to do with expectations.
Were you saying that if you live in New York and a company in Minnesota wants you to do work, you have to take into account their cost of living rather than just yours, because they're not going to recognize the inflated. They'll see the numbers as inflated.
Possibly. It's more like if you're sort of like, let's say you've got a freelance career in New York City and then you move to like rural Texas. There's going to be a very big disparity in what the understanding of value of the work is going to be. That said, if somebody is calling you for you to do, like, it's about where you are located. If Minneapolis is calling New York and you have New York prices, they're paying New York prices. Like they're calling you. Your bills don't magically get lower because you're working for somebody in Minneapolis. Although Minneapolis isn't cheap either. So, but you see what I'm saying? It definitely is a factor. I don't know how to give you a good quantifiable number.
Right.
Yeah, I think that just kind of speaks in part, at least, to the importance of, like, you know, your own personal budget as part of how you figure out pricing. It's not definitive the only thing, but you certainly want to map out your own costs and expenses. And of course, cost of living is a part of that. And there's also, just for people out there, there's a handy, PayScale has a cost of living calculator where you can actually compare different cities and kind of see the different prices as like it relates to rent and groceries and other kinds of things. It would be kind of helpful in the scenario that Justin was talking about, and being able to see, you know, what are the differences if I did want to kind of compare across regions.
That's a good point.
So yeah, great question. Let me see if looks like that one got answered. Got a couple points in the chat. Okay, cool. So I've got one more question, selfishly. And this actually I think kind of dovetails with the conversation you're having about, clients and pricing. Are there ever, or have you ever encountered kind of warning signs or red flags to look out for with a potential client where, if they do or say these things, it might just not be worth, because sometimes it's just not worth, not every project is worth doing. Sometimes there's projects that saying no is the best thing you can do. And so I'm wondering if you have any tips around that.
Well, when this pandemic hit, I have 2 kids, and they both had to stay home from school, and my youngest needed tutelage, help with her online learning, and so that in itself, figuring out what your circumstances are at the moment, it's very important to keep yourself healthy and sane. Some people don't have that luxury and have to juggle both. I was fortunate that I could reduce the jobs I was taking so that I could really keep on top of my daughter. But then there are plenty of clients that right away that they're, and I know an artist, an illustrator, who would have the PITA upcharge, the pain in the ass upcharge. I'm not sure if I like calling a client that, but she kind of would buffer her price a little bit, knowing that it wasn't going to be easy.
Yeah, I would say there are definitely jobs that you shouldn't take. There are times when it's just like it's not worth your time. I would say that that there's a big reason why we talk about contracts, is because contracts will outline what the deliverable is going to be, what you're going to get paid, and timeline, along with remedies for each of those things. If the client doesn't give you feedback in time, if they have a really hard deadline and you kind of put together a timeline and say, look, first round is going to come in this day, I need feedback by this time. Second round is going to come in this day, I need feedback this time. If that slips, there has to be something written in the contract. And if clients are letting things slip while assuming, it's hard to do it during a project. At that point, you really have to sort of stay on them. Ahead of time, I would be wary of anybody who sort of balks at a price without understanding it, or is constantly trying to talk you down in price. It's not worth it a lot of times. If you're getting weird vibes, just cut it loose. Even if it seems like a really great opportunity, if they try to make it seem like working for them is a benefit to you,
yeah,
they're probably full of it. Because
but back
to
what you were saying though about missing deadlines and all that falls under what we were talking about communicating with your clients,
right,
and making sure that you're managing your clients. That's part of it. It is often in our hands to be sure that this is a successful experience for,
right.
It doesn't have to be for us necessarily, but definitely for them, so that if you want another job from them, that they'll be there. So you have to manage.
Although, as a caveat to that, I did have a client one time that paid a very hefty down payment for a big chunk of work. I delivered the first round, heard nothing, followed up, heard nothing, literally went to their office, nobody was there, and that was the end of it. I walked away with a down payment and never delivered anything.
Wow.
Despite my hardest effort getting it. So they were great in that respect. I wouldn't work with them again, but man, it was fantastic.
What's the name of this company?
It was a nonprofit.
Little outreach.
They need the money. Or no, but you're right.
It was in a contract.
They have money for creative work. Don't always assume that a nonprofit can't pay. I do a lot of work for my place of worship, and I do a lot of free work, pro bono work for them. But they know that when it's a bigger job, or when it's if they have a budget, they ask me what my price is, and I give them my price. And they know from the pro bono stuff that I will deliver, I will communicate, I will deliver great work. And so they know that when it's time for the paying work, I'm working on a pro bono right now, and also a large project for them at the same time. And that's just, they have a budget, so great. I get to get paid for this particular one. They don't throw the huge ones at me for pro bono. fortunately.
That's good.
Yeah. And I think that I love how you talk about pro bono in this talk, because I do think, selectively for the right reasons, it can be a great tool. Obviously as a way to kind of use your creative skills to missions and values that you care about. I mean, that's an amazing thing unto itself. But I also think, especially when you're starting out, doing it selectively as a way to kind of like train your freelancing muscle can be good. We want to balance that against, we don't want to be doing free work all the time, because
Right.
that's not helpful for anybody. So, it's a balancing act. But I do think, and the other thing I really like, I think Justin, you had said this about the pro bono work, is still showing them the full value of what you're giving them, and then kind of zeroing out the cost, right? So they know that, like, hey, normal circumstances, this is a very valuable service, and you're getting this because of XYZ reasons at a
Yeah.
discount or a pro bono. I think that's a great point.
And I think one of the things that sometimes gets overlooked, I know I do a lot of hiring sometimes for apprenticeships and things, and I look at tons of portfolios. And one of the things that always stands out to me is people who have non-project work in their portfolio. And even if that is, I look at paid work and pro bono work for nonprofits the exact same way, because that was somebody giving you direction. That was somebody, sometimes you've got a little bit more leeway. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you've even less when it comes to pro bono work. So, but that whole real client aspect to it can't be understated. It's nice getting it. It's relatively low risk because they're not paying. So if you slip a deadline, it's not as crucial, but it's a good way to get introduced to it. You should still watch your deadlines, and you should obviously still communicate, but it's a little lower risk than somebody who's paying you $100 an hour to do some work and is expecting things done.
Right. And while I was a senior at RISD, Judy Sue Goodwin Sturges brought in the Riverkeeper, who is the guy who working to keep the Hudson Bay clean, and he came in with this wonderful illustrator who worked with us to create projects, pro bono projects, that helped people understand what their work was about. And out of that, I won first place, and they took my poster, and at one point Pepsi was interested in sponsoring a printing of my poster. It ended up never happening, but there was a woman in my class whose children's book that she was working on for the project, I think it got picked up. So it's really interesting to find where your projects could end up taking you. And I was really appreciative of how Judy Sue kind of brought them in and kind of introduced us to the whole concept of pro bono work. Is she still there? Is she still teaching?
She is. Yeah. Yeah. Actually,
Hello.
saw her not too long ago. I was in the illustration department maybe a month ago or something like that, doing a talk, and she was there. Yeah. She's still doing her thing.
Any attendee in one of her classes? Throw it in the chat. Oh,
yeah, you got one
about healthcare and health insurance.
Yeah, that's a tough one. This one's really tricky because it really depends on your state. So the question here is, can you talk about healthcare or health insurance? It's different now. I mean, it used to be very much state-based. Now it's a little bit different because obviously most states have, there's, different ways of getting health insurance via the state. I've been lucky enough to always have a spouse or a significant other who I can mooch. Is that the word? Mooch off of, get their health insurance. I know a lot of freelancers who will, who basically just go to their state connector and you find it that way.
Do you either of you know anything about the Freelancers Union? I think I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is that they help connect freelancers to healthcare plans. So just like potentially an additional resource to the state connectors that you're talking about. It's okay if you don't, but that's what I've heard. So it might be.
I know that was something I've heard about, but I don't know much about it specifically.
Maybe worth checking out, and I can certainly look into it too and follow up with students who have questions about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
The next question, I think both Justin and I can answer it in completely different ways. So I'd love it, Justin, if you can start.
Yeah.
This one first.
So the question here is, what can be done if a client violates terms of a contract after the work is done? How can they be held accountable? That's tricky because, really it becomes about, is it worth you? First off, there's always the asking nicely. Hey, I saw that you were doing this. We licensed it for this and not this. I'm just hoping that, what's going on. Can you, how can we resolve this? Is there a way we can extend the license? If you're getting
to continue that thought, you make the assumption first
that they want to extend the license.
Sorry?
You assume that they want to extend it, or that they made a mistake.
You assume that it was just a mistake, and that's how you approach it. You don't approach it like that they've done something wrong. You approach it like, oh,
hey,
you may not have realized. So therefore, here's I know that an illustrator, Mark Monlux, he'll send an invoice and say, oh, for that additional, here's my invoice. Sorry, go ahead, Justin. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's it. That's actually a really good point.
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up. The other part of it was that at some point it kind of just becomes, if you're willing to pursue it, and most of the time it's not worth doing. Hi, Ed. Tell us about how it is.
I knew you were going to go that way, but first,
you knew I was.
A story about it. One time, didn't you turn off someone's website?
I did, yeah. He didn't pay, so I shut off his website because I had the keys.
Right. I love that.
And guess what? He paid.
They paid. Yeah. That's where I thought you were going to go.
I forgot about that.
So many artist groups, including the Graphic Artists Guild, which I'm heavily involved with as a volunteer, have been lobbying for years for something called the CASE Act. And the CASE Act is a small claims court for creatives, because going to a large federal court to guard your copyright is prohibitively expensive. So the CASE Act just passed this January, and now the Copyright Office is working on putting together the small claims court, which is going to take a little while, but this is exactly why. It's an opt-in. You can, the person you're suing can opt out, but there are not necessarily consequences, but there are negative reasons why they wouldn't want to do that. There are reasons why they wouldn't want to do that. So the small claims court is exactly what we need so that we can defend our copyright or defend our contracts without having to spend $30,000 on just a lawyer to get back $5,000 or $1,000.
And it's, even with that though, I think that's awesome. And I didn't know that. And it's also still worth making sure that it's worth your time. Because even if you're not spending, if it isn't costing you money, it could be costing. I mean, this is a webinar in and of itself.
But there have been a lot of social media posts about people who find their, for example, find their work on a website that's selling apparel and such. And a lot of designers and artists rally around those people and just bombard that company online through social media with taking things down, for example, or paying the artist. So there are, that's not the most efficient way, and maybe you don't have enough people keeping an eye on you or helping you out, but that is another way of just kind of pointing them out in public. So there are a lot of approaches. There's no way to know what's the best way, but community. We are a community. Find someone to talk to. Find someone to get some information, to get some ideas for your particular situation. If that is something that Mr. or Miss Anonymous, if that's something that's actually happening to you right now.
My cat was fascinated with your answer there, Ed. I don't know if you noticed, but she was like
waving hands.
Loving it.
I don't know, whatever it was working for her. Maybe she's been stiffed on a contract before that I don't know about. That's possible. But great. We do have one more. I was going to say last call for questions here, but it looks like we've got another. I'll just vocalize it for you both. Which book or resources from the Graphic Artists Guild would you recommend for a beginner, or what resources from the Graphic Artists Guild would be useful?
So we were talking about the handbook. I swear I happen to have it next to me because I was typing in the stuff in one of the slides that I didn't leave it here because I don't get a piece of this at all. The new version is coming out next month, but this is it. It's the Pricing and Ethical Guidelines Handbook.
The pen.
And
I can throw it in the chat.
You'll find stuff about, professional practice, finding a suitable representative, ethical standards, cancellation and rejection fees. It's a bit of a read, but then within it, you'll find pricing guidelines as well. And thanks for putting the link in there.
Yep.
So there's a lot in here. And I highly recommend it. If you're a member, you get it for free. But on top of it, there are a lot of people online talking and writing about this sort of stuff. So, again, back to Skillshare. Again, none of these links, Wave apps and all, we don't get any money. Just want to be very clear about that. But so like on Skillshare, there are classes you can take. So where someone's talking about being a professional or understanding a certain angle of your creative business. So you can couple that with reading passages from the book, watching videos. This is when I graduated RISD a while ago, there was no internet. Was there? I don't think so. There was nowhere to go except for talking to your community and talking to other artists. But it's kind of the same thing now. Talk to your community and other artists and find what people are posting online and learn. I can't stress that enough. Don't stop learning. We put that in our presentation because we really feel strongly. I've been at this for that many years, and I am constantly learning and constantly watching other videos and reading what other people have written for their 2 cents. And you pick and choose what works for you. I know.
Well said. Well said. Any final thoughts from either of you before we wrap up? Any last pearls of wisdom? This is great. It's amazing. You're both always incredible. The presentation, like I said, is super comprehensive, and this Q&A has been super informative as well. Any other parting thoughts? Yeah, go for it.
No, I know that we went through a lot of stuff. We covered, we had 124 slides. We covered a lot of ground, and I know that a lot of it went by fast. And I know that a lot of it was just kind of like a blip for you. But that blip, if that's something that's interesting to you, again, search out more information. Don't, do your own projects and be creative all the time. But remember what we said at the end, you are running a business. And what will it take for you to run a successful business? You have to be all in. If you're freelancing, you got to be all in. You got to cover everything and know as much as you can. And I don't mean for that to sound scary. It doesn't have to be. You can tread into this carefully, like the cold ocean water. You just go in like up to your ankles for a bit until you're comfortable, and then you go a little bit further and further. So don't be scared, and I hope we didn't scare you. What we were trying to do was we were trying to spark some thoughts in you and some recognition, some realization that what you have to realize, that what you are starting to realize that you don't really know enough about charging tax, for example, or keeping track of your expenses.
Kind of to jump off what Ed's point is that you don't have to jump in full time. Like this isn't, there's plenty of people who do, they leave school and that's what I do. That was Ed. Ed's been full-time freelance forever. It could be the type of thing where you're working a design job or a job based on what you do, and then you kind of have a moonlighting type of thing. And depending on how that pans out, a lot of freelancers move full-time based on that. They realize it's not worth me spending 8 hours in an office when I can be billing at a much higher rate. And I've got the time, I've got the work to do it. So yeah, Ed touched on it perfectly, is you can go in as far as you want. You could take a gig every few months, or you can take one, as your day-to-day, like Ed, so.
Yeah,
terrific.
Yeah, I mean, I think excellent parting thoughts. And I love that idea of take it as you get comfortable and kind of move through it at your own comfort level and kind of build your skill set as you go. I think it's a great way to think about it. So with that, I want to again just thank you both so much. This was incredibly well done, as it always is. We've, partnered with you on this talk for years, but it's always one of the highlights for me on the calendar. So I want to thank you yet again for delivering an amazing talk for us. Yeah, and Ed sharing his social in case you want to reach out and connect. And on that, in a similar vein, if any of you out in the audience have additional questions, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to the Career Center, RISD, our email. Some of you may know it already, but just in case you don't, risdcareers@risd.edu. And we also have a wealth of resources online at our website, careercenter.risd.edu. Reach out to us. We're here to help you. And with that, I will bid adieu to everybody and say thanks again and good night. And take care, everybody. We'll see you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
See ya.
Thanks for
Thanks for
coming.
having me.